Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you all to the second panel discussion of the second day of PAWmicon, the 9th annual PAWmicon for Helen Woodward Animal Center. And we have such an incredible lineup of people today on this panel, but I have the great honor of introducing our moderator. This is Betsy Bird, Collection Development Manager of Evanston Public Library and the former Youth Materials Specialist of the New York Public Library. Betsy has quite a bio. She also is a specialist. Let's see, she reviews children's books for Kirkus. Is that how you say it, Betsy? Kirkus? Okay. And she has a blog, A Fuse Number 8 Production, which is hosted by the School Library Journal. She's the author of 2 picture books, The Giant Dance Party and The Great Santa Stakeout. She's the co-author of the very adult Wild Things, Acts of Mischief in Children's Literature, and the editor of the female-driven anthology Funny Girl. Her debut middle grade novel, Long Road to the Circus, illustrated by David Small, is going to be out this fall, 2021. And she also moderates the Story Seeds podcast and co-hosts the podcast Fuse 8 and Kate with her sister, where they discuss picture book classics. We are very honored to have you here, Betsy, and thank you so much for being our moderator today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm sorry I had a cat on my lap, but of course the cat man knew I wanted the cat to be on my lap, which is usually not the case, and so she took off for parts unknown. She will not be making an appearance until the moment this ends. But that's okay, because she's allowing me now to actually introduce my panel today, distinguished panel today. Yes, indeed. All right, first and foremost, I would like to introduce Barbara O'Connor. She is the author of award-winning novels for children, including Wonderland and How to Steal a Dog, the New York Times bestseller Wish. She lives in South Carolina. She often has like strong Southern settings for her books. She's won 7 Parents' Choice Awards. She's gotten numerous awards. Awards just pile up for this woman. They just piling up like crazy. Next, I would like to introduce Nick Bruhl. He is the author and illustrator of the Bad Kitty series. If you have not read the Bad Kitty series, I apologize. You have to leave right now and go read the Bad Kitty series because you are missing out. They are my favorite books. They include everything from picture books to illustrated novels. He has done picture books as well about other topics like A Wonderful Year, and he lives with his wife and daughter in Westchester, New York. Next up, Ursula Murray Houston, who has a MFA from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and a PhD from the University of Minnesota, and she lives in Minneapolis with her partner, their daughter, 3 cats, and tons of books. Her brand new book, I should say, is A Cat Story, which is this lush, and she's got a cat. Yeah, show me up, why don't you? You managed to get a kitty in the room with you.
Had to pick her up.
Aw, well, this book is also chock full of cats and absolutely gorgeous art. So people need to check that out too. And finally, we have Greg Neary, the Coretta Scott King honor-winning author of 12 books for young people, including Grand Theft Horse, True and Nell, and Ghetto Cowboy, which is actually about to become a major motion picture with Idris Elba. It's got Caleb McLaughlin. It's got Method Man. He's gotten the sequel, Polo Cowboy, which is coming out in 2021. He also wrote Grand Theft Horse, I believe in that. And also I hear he has an upcoming dinosaur book. His 16-year-old cat recently passed. I'm sorry about that, Greg. But you do have a crested gecko, 4 millipedes, which are your daughter's choice and not your own. And you worked with penguins in Antarctica. So check and mate, people. I can't actually beat that. None of us can. What you gonna do? All right. So first and foremost, I would like to welcome you all here. And I'd like to begin by saying this is a really nicely rounded panel. We've got brand new folks and people who have been doing this for decades. And each and every one of you has used animals in your books in different kinds of ways. And your books, the types of books you have written is very different as well. Barbara and Greg have done straight up novels, though Greg has done some writing in comics in the past. Nick has some picture books in his background, but the Bad Kitty books are this amalgamation of image and text. And then you've got the straight up comics and graphic novels that Ursula's got that'll just knock your socks off. So each one of you, though, has incorporated animals into your books at some point in the past. And I just want to start us all off by asking you what your relationship is in your own life to animals, and if that has personally informed what you write and illustrate. Anyone may begin.
Well, I live in Florida, and I'm surrounded by jungle. So I always like to say, you have no choice in the matter. You have a relationship with nature, whether you want it or not. So I have alligators behind my house. There are giant birds walking around, you know, bats and snakes and and armadillos and all kinds of critters. So I feel close to nature, you know, and that's why, you know, we have unusual pets like millipedes and geckos and things like that in the house. But I think animals are a great vehicle for storytelling, you know, because everybody loves an animal, right? And so immediately you can empathize, sympathize, and get drawn into a story. I never thought I'd write about horses, but I've written 3 horse books now. I don't know why. It just happened.
Did you know how to ride a horse before you began the books?
I was not a horse rider. I'm a horse writer. But I have horse people in my family. I have a cousin who's a horse trainer, and others who own horses. But I've always been kind of leery of them, but drawn to them at the same time. So that kind of, my way of dealing with them is through writing.
All right, I'll jump in. The only bone I've ever broken in my life was from falling off a horse, so I've never been on one since. But I come from a family of dog lovers. My dad especially raised dogs, bred dogs, and we always had lots of dogs. My sister's a dog lover, so I've always had a dog. And most kids like dogs, so I know that there's an appeal there. So either a dog is an integral part of the story, such as How to Steal a Dog. Without the dog, there would be no story. But then I also have used them just as a sidekick. It was interesting. I have a new book coming out in January called Halfway to Harmony. And originally it did not have a dog. So when I was talking with my editor about revisions, she said she had a request from the marketing department, could I please put a dog in the story? Because they wanted a dog on the cover. So I said, sure, I can put a dog in the story. So I added Pork Chop, who actually turned out to be a fun little character. But I said, I'll put a dog in the story, but can it be a 3-legged dog? And they said, sure. So now I have Pork Chop, the 3-legged dog. And the artist did it beautifully on the cover. Pork Chop's even on the cover. So I just love dogs and love to write with them, about them.
Well, and I like how you strategically placed a stuffed dog behind yourself. On
Yeah,
your
somebody gave me that. That's it's made out from a glove, a work glove. It's Willie, the dog from How to Steal a Dog. Somebody gave it to me.
Well, I grew up in New York City, but we had, it was unusual in that we had a tiny little brownstone. So I was one of the few kids who actually had a tiny backyard, even though I grew up in the middle of New York City. And so the reason I bring that up is that of the maybe dozen cats or so that have been in my life, I've never once had to actually formally adopt one, because they always came to us. And that includes the cat we have now that we found actually off a beach in Florida. Her name is Rose, and we named her Rose because she looks and smells nothing like a rose. But I love having animals in my life. I think having an animal helps you to observe yourself through observing the animal itself. They're a companion that becomes sort of an equal member of your household, even though you have, physically nothing in common. But they're so important to have, and it's I think it's especially important to have an animal, to have a pet of some sort if you have children. I think they learn a lot about interacting with the rest of the world, even humans, by having a pet to communicate with.
So
Ursula, I see your cat has disappeared the minute you were about to be on screen.
she's here in her little nestly spot next to me. We have the three of them. You can pop down there. Of course, I've just moved my camera, which is the cardinal no. They always tell you not to do that. Sorry, folks.
Like touching the microphone.
I haven't done that yet. I'll put it on the list. So my parents were given a cat when they got married, and it was real clear in our family who the other was and who had priority, and that was Glabella. But we've always had pets. We've always been surrounded by animals. We've lived in the city and in the country, and even when we lived in the city, we would go out and harass toads and pull up fish and look at birds and try to figure out animals. Frankly, even as a little kid, I liked animals better than people. Like, I'm sure you're all lovely, all of you I can see, and the ones that I can't see, but I would rather draw animals than people as a little kid, and now I'm that adult who will talk to your dog at the party. So.
And you have a second cat that just appeared behind you, which I love.
Yeah, we're not quite outnumbered. We have three. We have Myriad, Dido, and Zapfino, and they're all, special.
Those are good cat names.
I love it.
Oh, well done. I have to give you extra points for good cat names. Okay, wonderful. Well, that actually kind of reminds me of something that I was going to bring up anyway. So I have a feeling that you all write for kids. Kids will notice what they, like any human. You write a book, you don't know how it's going to be perceived by your audience. They're going to see in it what they want to see in it. So what kind of reactions have you gotten that might have surprised you or not surprised you from your readers? And I know, Ursula, your book isn't out yet, so it's kind of an unfair question to pose to you. But I know in Nick's case in particular, the Bad Kitty books have been interpreted in interesting ways, I think, by some of the kid readers. So yeah, are there ways kids have reacted to your books that have struck you as interesting?
Yeah, well, since you mentioned me, since you threw my name right out there, I'll just go first. It's sort of an unusual pitfall of having a series that has gained some popularity, in that the more people who read it, the more likelihood that I will find people who are outraged by details that I put into my own books. And that's good, right? I don't want to create something that is going to be necessarily comfortable for everyone. I want to create something that is going to cause people to want to explore or to go into places where they've never been before, even if it's about, these simple, heavily illustrated, short novels about a ornery pussycat. So yeah, it's been a fascinating run into finding out what people are going to be angry about. And it's also become sort of a social litmus test, because those things seem to change every few years. So for Bad Kitty Christmas, I made this very brief invocation of a character, Partner Pam. She's not even a character in the story. She's just mentioned in this list of friends and relatives this old woman has pictures of on her tree, and there's Partner Pam. And Partner Pam drove a lot of people out of their minds 10 years ago. I was getting angry emails, and you can still see like the 1-star reviews on Amazon to just sort of get into the mind of what people were so furious about. But that changed all of a sudden, and it's probably been about 3-4 years since I've received one of those emails. Whereas on the other hand, in the same book, I make a mention that there's a little, the stanza is like Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and Eid, you see, Christmas is all about family. And invoking Eid, a Muslim holiday, all of a sudden that became a source of fury. And I started getting emails about that. And then as that started to dissipate, there is this growing outrage over my use of the cartoon trope of a Grolix, where you have just sort of odd, symbols that imply a profanity. I'm not actually even using profanity. I'm implying that profanities exist. And it's been remarkable how often I continue to get those. But in the long run, I think it's great. And not because I'm I'm not actively trying to outrage anyone. It just happens organically. What I'm trying, it means that people notice. And if people notice, then they may care. And if I care, then I'm doing my job.
And along a similar line, I would say kids also, some kids have read into the Bad Kitty books at Bad Kitty. They are on the autism spectrum, and they have read Bad Kitty as being on the spectrum herself, right?
Well, that's been the wonderful side of it. I get I get so many wonderful. First of all, yes, I get when I get angry emails about a potentially gay character, I have received words from those people say, "Thank God you put in partner Pam." And I've received videos from kids who were afraid to go to school and then they saw that Eid was included. The autist, getting emails, meeting kids and the parents and teachers of children with autism was a really interesting, completely unexpected surprise. And it started happening early on. It happened, but it was happening so frequently that I started corresponding with all these people to find out why they thought my character was somehow hitting the right nerve for this community. And the answers I was getting was surprising. Yes, they saw that Kitty herself was in the spectrum. They saw enough of themselves in her and vice versa that they could relate to her. The other thing that really surprised me and surprised some of the other folks as well was that they were responding to Kitty's facial features. Her expressions were so exaggerated, but depicted with black and white illustrations that they were actually very comfortable interpreting them, which kind of went against a lot of the conventional wisdom about people who are in that spectrum who don't look at your face because they can't interpret expressions, which half the time is nonsense. But it was an interesting set of patterns that were being shared with me as to why that community was embracing Kitty, and it's magnificent. It's definitely without question my greatest point of pride about the work I do.
I feel left out that I have no outraged readers, But.
You have no outrage?
You will.
I guarantee it.
I don't know. What I find is interesting to me, kids are always very perceptive, and my horse books are kind of two-handers in a way, in that they're two main characters, and one of them happens to be a horse. Now, the horses don't talk. You don't get to read their mind of what they think, and yet they are equal level of character in some ways and very humanized in a way. And so kids pick up or comment on that a lot, or pick up on it. Like they totally understand that horse and everything about that horse and how the horse feels and what their relationship is. And, it's like when they're upset or happy. And so that was kind of like, a big thing for me, is not just to keep the horse people happy, but that the kids kind of understand and empathize and feel like they're one with the horse. It's kind of an interesting notion.
And do you get the horse readers, those kids who will only read horse books?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I get a lot of horse people of all ages who are into it, definitely, for sure. And I feel like, and because I have horse people in my family who are trainers, I really have gone to great lengths to make sure that it's accurate and also talk about things that a lot of people don't know about horses. So the horse people tend to support it.
Yeah.
If I can step in, that's what I really loved about Ghetto Cowboy, was that Coltrane was not a horse kid.
Right.
And like, I am all time, love horses, went to horse camp like every summer that I could like throttle my parents into letting me go. And like to read this boy character who's like, first of all, you don't describe him. Like I could picture myself in that kid. It's so smart. It's so good. But like, and then like he gets to know the horse and it does this sort of spin around in the middle and they become equal characters. Have you heard from a lot of kids that weren't horse people until they've read the book?
Yeah, and I think since I put myself in with them in terms of like that first time, if you're like an urban kid and you've never been around an animal of that size and power, it's a pretty scary thing. And you realize, horses are really sensitive and they sense when you're afraid. And if you're afraid and you ride them, they sense there's possibility for getting injured or things going wrong. So you really have to kind of put yourself at ease, and then the horse eases up, and then, so you have to kind of earn the horse's trust. And that the act of kind of giving yourself up to trusting an animal that big who's actually going to take care of you is like a big step, I think. It was a big step for me, and I think it's for any kid who hasn't ever been around a horse. So yeah, that's kind of how I approached the whole thing with that book.
Now, Barbara, you wrote a book, How to Steal a Dog. Did you get angry people who hadn't even read the book or were like, how dare you, madam?
Of course.
Oh.
Of course. Yeah, I fought for that title too. There was much discussion, but I stuck by my guns and it was a good decision because the book was very popular and it's still it's like 13 years old now, if you can believe it.
It had the world's greatest cover. It had the greatest cover of any middle grade novel.
It has a new cover now.
Oh, no.
I like it, but and when I do school visits, I have the first slide is all my books up there, and every time there's at least one kid goes, "How to steal a dog?" So they're intrigued by that whole concept that I'm going to write a book about teaching kids how to steal dogs. And of course, adults who have not read the book are outraged because they assume that's what I'm doing. I don't know. Amazon has not lots, but there's some reviews there, good reads about, the title and the morality and blah, blah, blah. But, I think the kids, because I write realistic fiction and kids are not perfect, I like to write flawed characters. They're my favorite. So to write about a kid who does something so wrong, and hope maybe for the right reasons, but it really, I think kids are totally intrigued by that I can have a character who does something like that, and we can talk about, would you do that, and that sort of thing. So that book definitely I've gotten a lot of feedback about discussions. In Wish, there's a dog named Wishbone, and he's on the cover, so kids are attracted to that. And they write to me a lot about Wishbone, and they make the connection. And the main character in that story is sent to live with an aunt and uncle because she has this dysfunctional family that can't care for her. So she feels sort of like she has no family, and she sees this stray dog, and she's determined she's going to catch this dog, and she ultimately does. And kids see that connection, these two strays, so to speak, that are attracted to one another, and how much the main character really needed that little dog. And then, of course, there's a very stressful part of the book where the dog disappears and everybody's all upset. Throwing a little tension there, but and again, like also as I mentioned in my new book coming out, Pork Chop, the three-legged pork chop, he added a lot of levity to the story, I think, and he was a real sidekick to the character that had him. So I think kids really see that and see the reasons why they're in the book and are attracted to it for sure.
Excellent. Now, Ursula, let's turn this over to you because you are alongside Nick. You're our illustrator here. You drew, as I said, this beautiful book, A Cat Story, which is coming out later this year. Now, I think we've all seen the cats are liquid meme that has gone around at one point or another. I want to know about the logistics of drawing a cat. How do you do that? And what would a person not necessarily know about the drawing of a cat or any animal?
Well, cats are easy to draw because they're just bean shaped. You just sort of start with the circle and then you figure out where is the backbone, and then you hang the skeleton off of that, and then you sort of melt them in together. Cats are a really wonderful thing for comic books because you want, especially if you're making comic books for small people, to point them to what's happening in the next panel. And cats have points, they've got noses, they've got tails, they've got ears, so they can stretch out and pull across the panel and how it goes. Like when you're talking about horses, horses are much less articulated. I mean, they've got way too many joints in their legs, but if you were going to be drawing a horse book, it would have to have lots of long, straight panels so you could have that full expression, because you can't draw how a horse feels unless its feet are moving and its feet are so far from its head, right? So dogs, it depends on the breed. Birds are aliens and wonderful little dinosaurs, and they hop and they move differently. Like, boy, is Pixar smart to do fish. Cats are easy to draw. Anything's easy to draw if you like spending a lot of time looking at something.
You understand, this is all part of my grand scheme for you to do the comic book version of Greg's book. I mean, I'm just basically, you've basically been selling it this entire time. I'm like, she knows how to do the panels for horses, eh? She knows a lot about
I'll tell you that
eh?
when I did Grand Theft Horse, which is a 250-page graphic novel, and I went to my illustrator and told him that, yeah, the other main character is a horse, and that horse appears on every page in probably 6 of the 9 panels at least, and he's going to be racing, and not only is he moving, but he actually has to be a character with real emotion and real facial recognition and a real relationship to the main character. Like, that should be easy, right?
Well, and then Nick, when you draw a cat, when you draw Bad Kitty, Ursula's cats are even when they're tense, they're very relaxed, they're very fluid. But Kitty, I feel like she is just energy, just sort of shrunk into a cat-like form. Like when she's on the page, like you get the distinct impression that either she is exploding, is about to explode, or has just exploded. So how do you go about drawing Kitty?
Well, drawing Kitty is tremendous fun because of that sort of coiled tension that's always in her, and I think that's actually a great personality aspect of cats in general that made her work as a character. I don't think the series would have worked if it was, Bad Horse, because cats have this. The example I always give is the way cats operate is on the exterior. They're calm, they're poised, they can curl into a ball, into a pillow. The moment you ring the doorbell, this explosion happens inside them. And also cats are terrific fun to draw because I'm not sure if too many other animals can actually transform themselves physically when they're stressed. I mean, cats will do that puffed out thing and that screech and that yowl that is just so wonderfully dramatic for what I do. So when I'm drawing Kitty, I've drawn her billions of times now. It's a pretty simple form, and I love that the S curve that Ursula was talking about. I have the most fun when I'm drawing freaked out, stressed out Kitty, because then I can bring out the Jackson Pollock in me and just scribble, scrabble all over the page until I find that sort of chaotic shape that I want her to be in, and that makes her look. The illustration looks so spontaneous and works for those moments.
Yeah, if anyone wants to see the video of cats sniffing the durian fruit, I highly recommend it. You can see exactly what Nick is talking about in terms of how they can transform themselves in an instant. They don't care for it. Yeah.
Who thought the video of that? How did this come about?
It's a bunch of people. So clearly there were so many versions of this, they just compiled them into one video because they were like, well, this is a thing.
I'm Chinese and I've never felt compelled to buy durian fruit until this moment.
I think you need to do it, and I think your cat needs to be on.
And I got to videotape it apparently for the world. Yeah.
All right, now this leads us to our next question. Is there any way in which you would not use an animal in one of your books? For example, could you ever kill a pet? Now, a lot of people, adults as well as kids, feel it so much more keenly when harm comes to an animal rather than a person, whether it's in a film or a book or anything else. So is there anything you would not do with an animal in one of your books?
I would never kill one off. I just could not do it. You know, I had Wishbone ran off, and poor Willie got stolen and kept in an abandoned house. You know, a lot of people thought that was so mean. I guess it was, but it turned out okay in the end. But I can't stand to read about an animal being hurt or dying. It just breaks my heart. So I could never do that. Stolen and lost as far as I go.
I had a friend years ago who was very sensitive to seeing animals harmed in any way in media, in film or television, whatever. So we all knew he would never see a movie first run. He needed to know if an animal was going to be harmed in it in any way. He just needed to. So we, you know, so everybody knew this about him. So if we saw a movie, we'd say, it's good, or, you know, pass on this one. To answer your question, I can only think of one anecdote for my own personal books, and this was early on in the Bad Kitty chapter book run, where I had this notion where Kitty's owners are going to leave for reasons unknown, and they're hiring a pet sitter who's going to be this sweet old lady who's going to come and stay with the cat and the dog, and Kitty's shenanigans are just going to drive her insane, and she's just going to torment this poor old woman. And I handed in this outline, and my brilliant editor at the time, Neil Porter, said, it's not funny. She's being cruel to somebody who is herself not in power. She's an old woman. And I thought, you're right. It's not. It doesn't work. And the solution came to me the next day, where it's like, if I switch her out with Uncle Murray, then it's hilarious. And that was literally the only step I had to do. So it was really an interesting lesson in how Kitty's behavior, who is the target of her behavior. And so whereas it's like, yes, cruelty to animals is something that I will never do. I also don't want to see cruelty to the people, because then it becomes too real. And my books are just, you know, they're not real. They're very silly and for a young audience. So I don't think, I do not foresee death happening, but it's funny. Just being part of this discussion makes me think, I wonder if it's something I should cover someday, because it is something kids think about. So I'm not actually completely off that notion.
All right. Well, don't you dare kill off Uncle Murray.
I killed off a horse in the beginning of Ghetto Cowboy, and it is a kind of a shocking event, but it's kind of like the character needs to be shocked because he's basically being abandoned in this very unusual neighborhood. And it's kind of a wake-up call, like, this is not, you know, you're not in Kansas anymore moment. And then how the community deals with it becomes an becomes a subplot of the story. So it's not just gratuitous or anything like that. It's a traumatic event for all the characters in an accident. And then Grand Theft Horse also deals with the reality of horses being killed in, you know, horse racing, and how many horses die every year in horse racing. So that's kind of a point of fact, and to give a background of how dangerous this sport is for these animals.
Mm-hmm. I guess it depends on the story and the context and what's happening. Personally, there's a website, Did the Dog Die? And it's like your friend. If there's going to be a dog in a movie, I will go to this website, Did the Dog Die? And if it said no, then okay, I'm good for the movie. But in my own work, if that's what the story needs, then that's what happens. I feel very ghoulish. But
there was that middle grade novel by Gordon Corman, No More Dead Dogs, where a kid is continually assigned dead dog books in school. Like, okay, we're doing Old Yeller. Okay, Sounder. Okay, what else? Where else? There's just a ton of them, and the kid rebels after a certain amount of time. Yeah, I don't think any cats come to harm in your book.
not permanently.
Not permanently. Yeah, no,
I mean,
nothing.
emotional trauma, but
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, emotional trauma, schmama. That's fine. Yeah. But, all right. Well, we have a little bit of time before the question, so I get to ask you this question: what are you guys working on next? Or can you?
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, all right. Bad Kitty Goes on Vacation comes out in January. It is my Abin Costello, Laurel and Hardy, Hope and Crosby buddy novel about Kitty and Uncle Murray venturing to Love Angel Kitty World, which is this amusement park that Kitty desperately wants to go to. And the book I just outlined, sent to my editor, I'll be working on for January 2021 will be Bad Kitty Gets a Phone.
Now, the one where Kitty's in the car with Uncle Murray, I saw the cover for that one. Whose idea was it not to put Kitty in a cat carrier and drive her somewhere?
There is a moment in the book where you do see her just sort of sitting in the back seat with a seatbelt, like, because that's what Uncle Murray kind of tends to forget, that she's a cat, which is okay. And when we were thinking of a cover illustration, that one came to me very quickly of just, what would happen if you don't have the cat in a cat carrier. But cat carrier is a big topic in one of the chapters. You always have the nonfiction part. Do you have a nonfiction thing on cats in cars? No, I don't. That would have been a good one. I thought about how to do nonfictions about cats and travel. And actually what I do for the nonfiction of this one is, because Uncle Murray's so heavily involved in the book itself, there is a simple 2-page fun fact, not from Uncle Murray, but on why cats are very rarely allowed inside hotels.
I did not know that.
Oh, and they have good reasons not to let dogs, yes, cats, no.
Oh.
I have the sequel to Ghetto Cowboy coming out next year, which is kind of where Cole gets sucked into the world of polo, which is also a thing in Philadelphia, and falls for a girl who's part of the military academy where they have a polo program. And it's kind of a West Side Story, between the polo world and the cowboy world. And then the movie hopefully will come out sometime when theaters open. But right now it's going to premiere at the Toronto Film Festival in September, hopefully. And then I have my dinosaur book that has penguins in it too. That'll be out probably next year at some point. And that also has a movie, an IMAX movie, about the hunting for dinosaurs in Antarctica, which actually came out like a week before everything closed. So it's now been postponed till next year as well.
I have Halfway to Harmony, this beautiful cover. There's Pork Chop, the three-legged dog. And that will be out in January. And I completely forgot to mention the fact that my book Wonderland, there are 3 points of view, and one point of view is from the dog Henry, who is a greyhound racer. I lived in Massachusetts where there was a greyhound racetrack called Wonderland, which is where I got the idea. Most of them have been outlawed now. Most people think that it's cruel to greyhounds. So, but some people disagree and had a problem with the book because I presented it as being a bad thing, but whatever. So that's what I got going on, and all I do now is jigsaw puzzles. I might write again, I hope.
I think I can say that my book is coming out in October, so that's what I'm working on. I shoot on most of the pages.
Cool. And how long did that take you to write, by the way, Ursula?
Well, I first had the idea in 2005, and I drew the first version of it in 2007. Then 2011, I drew it again. Then 2013. And then it took me about 7 months to draw the book that this is. So, variable.
So do you have any other book that's going to take you that long to do?
No,
Yeah.
I hope not. I have lots of ideas and lots of books, but you know, it's an interesting world.
Well, I do find that the kids in the library will get a beautifully illustrated graphic novel, and they'll read it literally in 5 minutes, something that's taken a person a decade to make. And they'll read it through, and then they will literally come to the desk and be like, great, when's the next one coming out? Like they're expecting it tomorrow. Come on, people. It's like, it does not occur to them that, like, if it's like a series that's been around for a while, that's okay. But if it's like a brand new, beautiful book, they'll be like, awesome, number 2, please.
Wonderful. Like one of the great things about comics is that they do read quickly and that they are so accessible. And even when you're dealing with higher level themes, you can kind of slip stuff underneath because they're going to read it in 5 minutes and think about it for the next 20 years, hopefully. So I don't care about that.
Oh, good.
I've had kids put books down in front of me on the table and say, I read this book while I was waiting online. and my line is always, you know, it took me 8 months to write and illustrate this book. This is like if I spent all day making this gourmet meal and you just slammed it in your mouth in 5 minutes. The next book of mine, you need to take 8 months to read it.
Yeah. Well, and Greg, how long have people been bugging you for a sequel to Ghetto Cowboy? Because that came out a while ago.
Since it came out, I mean, kids always asked, and I didn't have a story for a long time. But there was one kid who kept bugging me in particular, and it turned out he lived in that neighborhood. And he told me he was a cowboy who kind of crossed over into the polo world. And so I knew about there's a barn in North Philly that had the first African-American polo team. And it was literally like the Bad News Bears who went on to become national champions. It was like almost too good to be true kind of story. And so he kind of kept on me. And then the more I thought about that and just kind of like that cross between those two worlds, it seemed like, okay, I'll do it. But then it took me like 5 years to figure it out.
Makes sense. All right.
Hello everyone. I'm back. We've been enjoying this panel so much. I said right before we all went on, I said, I love smart people. It is so true for me. You guys are so interesting and witty and fascinating. And I love everything that you've been sharing with our audience. So I want to thank you so much for that. I am here for the viewer question part of this panel. So I actually have some specific questions for each of you. I'm going to start with Ursula. And I do want to mention that Ursula donated an original piece of art for our auction. Anybody who is watching right now should go on and bid on Ursula's art piece. It is absolutely beautiful, and we're so grateful to you for that, Ursula. So thank you. We had a question here. A viewer was asking, what is your preferred medium of art? When you're just doing something for yourself, do you enjoy like watercolor, ink pen? Why? And do you sometimes kind of mix it up? How do you like to do your art?
So it is not a very satisfying answer, but it depends on the day and what's really easy to grab. Most of my comics are drawn with fountain pens on pretty thick paper, so I almost always have 3 or 4 fountain pens in a pack of paper with me. But watercolor's great, oil's great. I've been doing egg tempera, which is really great because then you actually have to make the painting ground, which is ground down chalk, and you have to boil that, and then you get to make your own paints with egg yolks.
Whoa.
That's really enjoyable, but pretty well anything.
So when you first started art, was it mostly just picking up a pen and drawing?
Or my mom had a couple, I really enjoyed crayons,
Uh-huh. Got it.
It's never left.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you, Ursula. Okay, Betsy, I actually have a question for you. What inspired you to get into this industry, and how do you find inspiration for your various projects?
Well, I did not want to be a librarian at all. Certainly not a children's librarian. No, oh God, it's boring. No, I wanted to be a photographer. That's a sexy job. I was going to do that. I was going to take photos, and I'm terrible at it. I tried very hard. I'm horrible. So then I caved. I went to library school because I was the kid who made subject heading lists for her National Geographics for fun. Because I might want to know where the emus are. I never had to know where the emus were, but I had a list in case I did. So went to library school, but I was not going to be just your everyday librarian. I was going to be an archivist. I was going to preserve books. And then one day I came home and my husband said, "Why is your coffee cup on the book on how to preserve books?" And it was a sign. And I took a children's literature course on a lark. Because as it happened, when I was in college, I was in London and there was this new series called Harry Potter. And the second one had just come out. My mom was like, "Hey, get that." And I got it. And I was like, "It's pretty good." And then the whole thing blows up 2 years later in America. And it was like when you're into a band and everyone else gets into the band, you're like, "No, I was into the band." So I've been reading children's books pretty steadily since then. And then I took this children's literature course and I was like, this is what I was meant to be. And then I just started doing like children's librarianship. And then from that led into children's blogging about children's books, which was well timed because blogging had just started and it seemed like a new thing and everyone was like, new thing. And then that naturally led into writing children's books. And so that's how I came to it.
I like that. You know what I really like about you, Betsy, is that I think that when people think of people who love books, they think of very quiet people. And I feel like you are such an entertainer. You feel to me more like an actor. So it's lovely to see where people who love books are also very vibrant and
So I was a very quiet child. I did not say 2 words.
Animated.
So yeah.
And I like it very much.
There you go. I'm making up for lost time.
Okay, Greg, what are some of your tips for someone who is dealing with writer's block?
Writer's block is an opportunity to either put something away or kind of give into a story, meaning you're holding on to something so tight and so rigidly you can't move one way or the other. And to me, there's a certain point where if you're just fighting it all the time and you're not getting anywhere, you need to put it aside. Ghetto Cowboy put aside several times, sometimes for 8 months or a year even.
Wow.
And then one day you kind of figure out this very simple thing because you weren't thinking about it. And then you're like, oh, and that one thing unlocks the rest of it and you're going. Or you have to kind of give into it and the story wants to take you in directions that you hadn't planned for. But you're like, wait, we're not supposed to go that way. We're supposed to go this way. But your characters want to take you that way for a reason. And, do not resist it. Follow the characters at all times because they know what's happening.
I love that. That is such a great piece of advice. Can you tell me, just because that really interests me, that you put that book that has become so well known and beloved aside for so long? How long did it take you to write that book?
Well, I did 3 primary versions. So the first version I did, like, I was just hot. It was just coming, boom, 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 boom. And I got about 70% of the way through, and then suddenly, like, there was nothing, like just nothing. I had no idea where to go. And so I put it away for 6 months, whatever. Then I was like, oh, I know. And then same thing, took a totally different tack, got into about 80%, same thing, like just nothing. Like, put it away again for like a year. And suddenly I just figured out a key element to the main character that just changed the nature of the whole story. And then everything just fell into place.
I love that.
So
I think that's very inspirational.
Very simple core element that will unlock kind of the secret to the whole story.
I love that. That's very inspirational for writers, I am sure. Barbara, you share a lot about your upbringing in the South, special memories, boiled peanuts. Sundays in the Smoky Mountains. How do you bring in these regional touches, and what do you think is so special about bringing those into the stories that you write?
Well, when I first started writing for kids, I had absolutely no writing voice. It was just very bland. And then I read Missing May by Cynthia Ryland. And I had this light bulb moment because that book is set in the mountains of West Virginia where Cynthia Ryland grew up. And it was clearly her heart's home. And that really spoke to me. So I thought, maybe I need to write books that are set in my heart's home, which is the beautiful mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains, where I live now. I was born and raised in South Carolina. I spent a lot of time in these mountains, went to summer camp here. And then, but I moved away for a long time. I was in California, I was in Venice Beach for 11 years, went to Boston for 26 years. So I just am recently back in the mountains. But when I began writing stories set in my heart's home with boiled peanuts and those Southern flavors, I found my voice and I felt it. I knew it, I could feel it. And that's when I really felt that my writing took root. In fact, I wrote Cynthia Ryland a letter and she wrote me back. It's a handwritten note. It's in my scrapbook. Actually, she's written me 2 letters. So she gets a lot of credit for that. But I like to just, those are my memories. And so when I think about being a child and when writing as a child character, those are the things that come to my mind, is the little Southern things. I love the dialect. You gotta be careful when you write Southern, not overdo it. So the Yankees in New York, the copy editors, they don't get half that stuff. They're always correcting stuff. I go, no, that's the way they say it. For instance, the expression, I like to die, which means, of course, I nearly died. And so kids don't get that at all. They'll write me letters. There's an error on page 34. You said he like to die. It's a great opportunity. I get to explain to kids this is, it's a Southernism, and they're like, oh gosh. So I love drawing on that, and that's where I think it's sort of expected of me now. I've got sort of that reputation of being the Southern writer, but I keep toning it down, not too much, but I got to get some boiled peanuts in there somewhere. But that's what I like to write.
Yeah, that's lovely. And that's a great tip for writers, is to bring in where your heart is, because it probably really makes the story sing, Okay, Nick, here's a question for you. You have said your childhood cat, Zuzu, was the inspiration for Bad Kitty. What was it about that particular cat that moved and inspired you to create a whole line of books about her?
Well, when the idea for the character came to me and I was writing down the manuscript, and the day came for me to try and sketch her, she was the first cat that I had in mind, because she had this just beautiful design. She was a black cat, just completely pitch black from the tip of her ears to the tip of her tail, all except for this elegant tuft of white fur on her chest. And when I was very little, it always reminded me of being like a piece of jewelry on her. So you hear stories all the time about people who will sketch and draw a character so they get it right. I mean, I did a book called Bob and Otto about a friendship between a worm and a caterpillar, and I did maybe 40 paintings of the caterpillar before I got it right. But when I sat down and imagined what Kitty would look like, I did one painting and I was done. And that was her. And it was based entirely on Zuzu. The remarkable thing about it is that I could not have planned it better had I known, because only a couple years later I would start doing these chapter books about the same character, where all the illustrations would be black and white and gray. So she was already the perfect design for that type of book.
Fantastic. It's like faded. Now, we've only got 5 minutes left, or maybe 4. First thing I wanted to say to you, Greg, you had made a comment earlier that I really genuinely believe in. As the PR director at Helen Woodward, my job is continually to write stories to get media attention. And I've always said I'm the luckiest PR director in the world, because I'm writing about animals, and so many people connect to stories about animals. So I want to thank you all, from all of us at Helen Woodward, for knowing the beauty of animals and the incredible lessons that they teach us all the time. I feel like I get smarter every day from being around animals. It certainly is such a beautiful thing that you do, and a way to continue furthering humane education for kids, and reminding people how special these animals are, and how they have something to teach all of us. So thank you very much. And thank you for being a part of our panel. I wanted to go through and let each one of you have a final word. If you want to say anything about the work that you do, or animals, or anything, I'd love for each one of you to take a moment and say something. So let's go ahead and start with Ursula. Any final words? Or you don't have to.
Oh, most of the time, if I have a pen in my hands, I'm much more articulate. We've never had a cat that we've paid for. All of our cats have always been shelter cats, and they've always picked us out. And that kind of philosophy towards pet ownership, which is more of a collaboration. You look at the cat, the first cat that I ever had, I'd gone through this terrible breakup, and my wonderful doctoral advisor was like, "Come on, I'm going to take you for a cup of coffee." And I was like, "No, Frenchie, no, let me die alone." And she's like, "No, cup of coffee, cup of coffee." Hold up to the animal shelter. And I'm like, "No, I'm going to die alone. And then I'm going to have a cat that's going to eat me. No, Frenchie, no." She drags me in and she sits me down into the middle of the cat colony room. These were the last chance cats. And I sit there for 30 minutes and all of them ignore me. And I'm like, oh my God, nobody wants me. Even the cats. And I stand up and my shoulder bag is heavy.
Oh.
I look down and there's two little orange eyes staring at me. It's like, "Get me out of here, lady." So I hand the bag to the lady at the front. I'm like, "Cat." I didn't know what he looked like until I brought him home. I'm just saying that could be your life with an adopted animal, because he was the world's best cat. He played PSA agents.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ursula. How about you, Greg?
Yeah, I'm a big cat person too, and the cat that we had for the longest time was a wild cat who came out of the jungle, and we had a series of hurricanes back to back, and in between two hurricanes I was cleaning up branches and stuff, and I kept hearing this meowing, and I looked around kind of under the brush. I found this cat had just given birth to all these kittens, and the next storm was coming. It was already, so I had to bring them all inside the house. And, so that cat just moved right in. And I had a 3.5-year-old daughter at the time, and who kind of took care of that cat and named that cat Mexico. And so I always like to say cats always like spin your reality, because that cat was an indoor-outdoor cat and would come in for dinner. And my daughter, when it was time for dinner, would stand in front of our house and yell. She named the cat Mexico for some reason. And she would yell at the top of her lungs, "Mexico!" So if you were just walking by, there's this strange little kid yelling the name of a country out loud. My kid. But she was beloved, and definitely a welcome part of our family for a long time.
It's amazing. How about you, Barbara?
Well, yeah, the most recent dog that I have gotten is a rescue dog. I tried to find one. I can only find it. That's Rocket. His name is Rocket.
Oh,
but I have another dog named Ruby. And in my PowerPoint presentation, when I go to schools, there'll be 300 kids out there, and I show them this picture, this slide, and I say, that's my dogs, Ruby and Rocket. One of them's a good dog, and one of them's a naughty dog. Which one do you think is the naughty dog? And every single time 300 kids yell, "Rocket!" He just has this look. He makes me laugh every day, but he is very challenging, hates UPS with a mighty rage, smart as a whip, but kids just see him right away. He's the naughty one. I'm really lucky that I was able to adopt him, and he's been a great addition to our family. So I'm lucky.
Thank you for adopting. And how about you, Nick?
Well, about 13 years ago, we moved into a house, not the one we're in now. And I had a very similar experience to Greg's in that while we were dismantling an old shed that was in the backyard, I found this cat and the 3 kittens that she'd just given birth to, maybe days beforehand. And my quest for the rest of that summer was to find the cat and the kittens, because she moved the kittens almost immediately, and to rescue them on my own. The long story short is I found a home for the kittens. The cat herself moved in with us, which was pretty shocking because she was a pretty feral thing. And as considering all the cats that have been in my life, without question, this cat, Esmeralda, we called her, Esme, was the greatest cat, the greatest companion, animal companion I'd ever had, and I don't know if I'll ever have one quite like her. So about 2 Januaries ago, she died, as you know, our pets will do. And I was so heartbroken, and I wasn't sure what to do about it, because our relationship and our history was so unique. Was I did what I'm supposed to do as somebody who writes stories, is I sat down and started writing her story. And as I started writing her story, I realized this was not just my story, it was also her story. So I started writing the story both from my point of view, then her point of view. And then I realized, wait a minute, this is not just our story, this is a story that I should share. So I started writing it from a little boy's point of view and the cat's point of view. And then I realized, wait a minute, cats and people don't think the same way. So I started writing the boy's story in prose and the cat's story in poetry. This is telling something that may never happen, but I've written this book. It has may or may not ever see publication, but it is in many ways of all the things that I've done over the years, the book, the story that is closest to my heart. And it's entirely because of this wonderful cat whose life, whose lives we shared for about a dozen years.
Yeah, they certainly do inspire us, don't they? They're really incredible creatures. I want to give Betsy the very last words, our wonderful moderator. Just a final thought, Betsy, that we can take with us.
Oh, I'm not going to give you anything better than what Nick just. I'm supposed to follow that? No way. Love your pets.
Sorry,
Right?
Betsy.
That's the long and short of it.
Oh, well, I love you all. Thank you so much from Helen Woodward Animal Center and from all of our orphan animals. You guys did such a beautiful job and we enjoyed it so much. We'll be recording this and this will be available for other people to watch if they didn't get to see it today. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We really
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.